Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahapushai, Ba'ashem, Rakapadash, double honors to the apostles and elders, great millstone, for teachings of truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquatham and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Require. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, just wanted to talk a little bit about character, right? And how character scares away niggas, the degenerates of our people. It's just something as an observation I've noticed, you know. But before I continue, let me just read out the definition for character in the etymology here. And it says, symbol marked or branded on the body. It says symbol or drawing used in sorcery. It says alphabetic letter, graphic symbol standing for a sound or syllable. It says symbol or imprint on the soul, instrument for marking, to engrave, pointed stake. But here's really the point. Where is it? Okay, here it is. It says character in the Greek. It says a defining quality or individual feature. This one hits the nail on the head here. It says sum of qualities that define a person or a thing and distinguish it from others, right? So, we take on the character of Yahushua, and that character, makes us different. It distinguishes us from, everybody else, these people on the planet Earth, especially, especially our people as well, because, their character is basically, they take on the character and the tenets of, their so-called idols. And their idols can even just be another Israelite that is famous according to the eyes of this world, right? So, that's why a lot of these, when you think about it, a lot of these men, is it that trend of men, for example, like sagging their pants, for example, when men see that and they see, men who have status in this society do those things, they take on that character, they take on those traits, that behavior, so on and so forth, right? But I kind of just wanted to touch on this idea, that was just an inspiration from one of the brothers in Chicago in regards to character and how character kind of makes you different, how character distinguishes you from everybody else and scares people off, right? That's one of the things of, you know, having the character of Yahushua, right? It either, pulls, it either attracts people to you or it repels them, because, because a lot of these people's, their deeds are essentially evil, right? As a matter of fact, I'll start off with that. And that's another thing that having character, um, these people, our people are, we're supposed to be like, as Israelites, we're supposed to be like the benchmark of, what a man is supposed to be, right? But, our people, they partake in everything, they do everything, they drink anything, they eat anything, they don't, when you go into, like, I remember reading this one article in regards to, not to go too off topic, I remember reading this one article in regards to the I forgot those people, the so-called royal family in Britain, and when they have dinner, you know, they have a specific set of etiquette. When they sit with the queen, they have they need to have, like, for example, like proper table manners. There has to be proper speaking etiquette. There needs to be proper, etiquette when you're eating, when you take up your knife and your fork and so on and so forth. That is one of the biggest things that our people lack is etiquette, you know, and etiquette, coming from, you know, uh, first and foremost having a healthy fear of the Lord, because that is what produces etiquette and conduct, right? So, since I mentioned this real quick, let me get this right here. This is John chapter 3, verse 19, and it says, Yahushua is speaking, and this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil, right? So when you think about why a lot of people might, be essentially, I don't want to say scared off, but that's basically what it is. They're being scared off by, your presence. A lot of the times it's, because of the demeanor that, we have that emanates from us, right? And, when you say that you don't partake in certain things, I don't do certain things, or I don't celebrate my birthday, I don't eat shrimp, I don't eat pork, they look at you as if you have, 7 heads and 10 horns. I'm just playing, I'm just joking, but they look at you in the sense of, you're different. They look at you in the sense of, what's wrong with this guy? Why is he, why is he behaving like that? Why isn't he partaking in the same filth that we're partaking in? And Jake looks at you as if you're a threat. They look at you in the sense of, they don't, their what's it called? Their deeds are now being exposed because it's like, you're shining and casting a light on them. But we're merely conduits, right? So that light is shining through us, right? But it still is the same. Like if you think about, if you're sleeping and somebody comes into your bedroom and it's like it's really dark out and somebody switches the light on, Jake would either do two things. They would either hide under the covers or they would just deal with the light, right? And that's one of the things that our people do. Our people are more likely to, hide under the covers because they realize a lot of their deeds are evil, right? Let me see, verse 20, and it says, "For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest their deeds should be reproved," right? So a lot of our people don't like it when their deeds are essentially brought to the light, because, they like to partake in the filthy things, for example, for example, eating pork is a huge thing, amongst the tribes. They don't like they don't like that light being shunned on them, I believe that's correct English, right? Verse 21, and it says, "But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds made manifest, that they are wrought in the Most High." As a matter of fact, let me read that in the AMP. And it says, "But whosoever practices truth and does what is right, morally and ethically and spiritually, comes to the light, so that his works may be plainly shown to be what they are, accomplished in the Most High, divinely prompted, done with the Most High's help, in dependence on Him," right? So, that's honorable. That's why we go into the ways of our forefathers in Yahushua, because really and truly, a lot of our forefathers, there were moments and situations where they did practice, the right thing. They might have been just being chastised for a certain period of time, right? And at the same time, during that period, they were still practicing, they're still doing the right thing, so to speak, right? When you talk to, like, I'll give you an example, just as I was thinking about this. One of the things I was reflecting on is Joseph's story. And if you tell a lot of our people, like, for example, like Joseph's story in regards to when the Pharaoh's wife, hit on him, a lot of our people, a lot of our men, what they would do is entertain that conversation and try and lie with her, right? But Joseph knew in his mind that that was wickedness, right? He knew in his mind, like, this ain't right, so he fled, right? But if you tell people about certain these things, like, nah, I'm not going to do that, you know, they kind of look at you crazy. That's how far gone we are as a people. As a matter of fact, let me get Lamentations. Our degeneracy is something that is very, common within our people and common within our nation as a whole. This is Lamentations 4 verse 1, and it says, "How is the gold become dim? How is the most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. The the precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold, how are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter," right? So, we went from a state of, being glorious to being filth, right? The nations don't look at us as people who are respectable, right? They don't look at us as people, as actually have any sort of wisdom, right? Because the core element is fear, and a lot of our people don't fear the Heavenly Father, right? So it produces, so what is that? What is the byproduct of not having that fear? It produces misconduct. It produces behaviors that are very, very displeasing in the eyes of the Lord, and it shows that we don't have any wisdom. The way we don't carry ourselves in a certain way, right? Our people think that the end all and be all is to have a lot of money, but the character, the etiquette, is a huge piece of the puzzle that our people are strongly missing. That's why the scriptures say that wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. With all that getting, get understanding, right? But they don't have that because there is no fear, right? So what I wanted to get is, I don't want to make the lesson too long, but this is something that that commonly happens, because the scriptures say that he that departed from evil maketh himself a prey. Because we don't partake in these things. People look at you, they look at you strange, right? This is Nehemiah chapter 5. Okay, this is Nehemiah chapter 5 verse 7, and I'll read it in the I'll read in KJV actually, and it says, "Then I consulted with myself and rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury every one on his brother. And I set a great assembly against them." Right? So you had a lot of our people that were putting usury upon their own kin, or against their own or against their own upon their own nation, right? This is verse 8, and it says, "And I said unto them, after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold to the heathen, and will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be sold unto us?" Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer. And I said, and also I said, "It is not good that ye do. Are ye not to walk in the fear of the Most High, Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, because of our approach of the heathen, our enemies?" Right? So he's rebuking them. Nehemiah is rebuking a lot of the top echelon of our people, because they were doing something they're not supposed to do. He's reminding them, going back to that core element of fear. He's reminding them, like, yo, man, we're supposed to walk in a particular fashion. As a nation, that's what that's what makes us stand out, and show that we have a sense of wisdom and understanding. How did was it Moses that said it in Deuteronomy? Hold on, I'll go back to that account. Just give me 1 second. Okay, yes, Deuteronomy 4, verse 6, and it says, keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear these statutes and surely say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people, right? So there's a way, we ought to walk. And he had a lot of our people in that time that they just weren't doing that, so they were becoming, in the eyes of the heathen, a reproach. They were not, and that's kind of like how we're seen today. The heathens look at us and they think, oh, look at these people, man. They take us for a joke. They make jokes about us. Where's your father, right? Well, I guess you don't know, huh? And they make running jokes about us and all that. We're not people who are seen as people who are looked up to. And Esau has a hand in that, obviously, because he's destroyed our families and our households and so on and so forth. But the conduct, again, in the midst of captivity, Jake lacks a lot of that conduct. you know um Going back to Nehemiah here, and it said verse 10, and it says, I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact them the money and corn. I pray you, leave off this usury. So leave off those things that you were doing, right? Because we're not supposed to put usury upon our own people, man. Verse 11, I restore and pray you to them even this day, that their lands and their vineyards and their olive yards and their houses and their 100th part of the money and of the corn, the wine, and the oil, that ye exact of them. Then they said, we will restore them, and we will require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. Then I called the priests and took an oath of them, and they should do according to this promise, right? So you make sure you got a witness. Okay, you said you're going to do this, this, and this. You know what I'm saying? So essentially, Nehemiah was in that spirit of Yahushua, because he was rebuking them, because he had to correct them, like, yo, you can't be doing this, right? So that type of character, doing those sorts of things and walking uprightly, it scares away our people, because they don't want their deeds to be reproved. They don't want to be corrected. They just want to do just as they want to do, right? As opposed to walking uprightly. The scriptures say that a man should be known by his walk, right? Let me get that actually. I get one more, and then I guess I will close it out. This is Sirach 19. Okay, this is Sirach 19, verse 29, and it says, a man may be known by his look, one that hath understanding by his countenance, when thou meetest him, a man's attire, excessive laughter, and gait, which is essentially like, the way you walk, show what he is, right? So the way that we carry ourselves, right? We don't walk in the way that our people ought to walk, and they're supposed to be walking in that way as Israelites, but they don't conduct themselves in that sort of fashion, right? And that's another thing I noticed too. A lot of these people who are like, a lot of our people that are fools, there's a sentiment of excessive laughter, because that's one of the things that happens when you don't have a lot of wisdom. When you have a lot of wisdom and understanding, it you tend to smile less. And one of the things I've noticed with a lot of our people, they're constantly in that spirit of excessive laughter. They're not it's like they're not completely aware of what's going on. They can't take something seriously, and then they don't take themselves seriously. They want you to be excessively laughing with them, and they kind of like feel condemned in their spirit. That kind of scares them off, going back to the title, because you're not excessively laughing with them. We're kind of in that spirit of being extremely austere, because Yahushua was also austere, right? And then on top of that, what comes with under having more understanding is much grief. That's another thing as well, right? So what was that? Oh, Proverbs. Let me just get this one here. I think it's 20. Is it 29 and 27? Okay, this is Proverbs 29, verse 27, and it says, "An unjust man is an abomination to the just, and he that is upright in the way is abomination to the wicked," right? So, that shows, there is a difference in the way a just man and unjust man operates, because an unjust man is somebody they don't walk in a particular way. They don't conduct themselves in a particular way, right? And they're just an abomination because, you're just a dishonorable seed, right? That's why, the Lord is going to purge 2/3 of his the degenerate plants in his vineyard, because they're just an abomination, right? So, anyways, I guess I'll just leave it there. But I just wanted to touch on that, real quick. Something that I've experienced in something that I'm sure other brothers have experienced with people, dealing with people in the world, and you don't even have to say something to them for them to feel kind of condemned in their spirit. They will just feel that aura, like they say, that aura, vibrating off of you. You know what I'm saying? But I guess I'll just leave it there. But Lord's will, as always, this was edifying. I'd just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.